So if you look at any of the news media these days, and especially if you scroll down on the online newspapers to the place where the readers make their comments, well, first of all, that is a task that is not for the timid, the weak, or the faint of heart. Let's just be clear. Some of those comment sections can be pretty frightening to see. So, excuse me. So what is up with all of that? Where do we get the idea that people who have sexually abused can't change? In fact, people who have done bad things, including drunk drivers or other forms of criminal behavior, these people change. They can and do change all the time. So where did we ever come up with this idea? Well, there's actually been some kind of interesting studies about this, and so if it's not too boring, I thought I might just talk about some of the studies really quickly. 1974. Now this is in my lifetime, okay? I would have been about 14 back then. A fellow named Robert Martinson was part of a research grant looking at prison treatment programs to try to figure out what works in rehabilitation. The first analyses came up empty-handed, and he wrote an article, although he didn't quite say it like this. He asked the question, does nothing work? And this actually became known as the nothing works doctrine. And in the wake of that study, a lot of states defunded their rehabilitation efforts for people who'd been in trouble with the law. And in 1979, now the first thing to know is that 1974 article made the international news. He went on the lecture circuit. I don't know what the talk shows were back then, but whatever there was before Oprah and all of that. And in 1979, he produced another article that basically said, I was wrong. And it didn't make the news at all. It didn't make the news at all. 1979, 10 years later, a guy named Paul Gendreau and his colleagues went back and looked at newer studies, better statistical methods, and said, we know that treatment programs for criminals work. We don't quite know what works about those treatment programs, but we know that something works. And so that became known as the what works doctrine, or the something works doctrine, which then turned into the what works doctrine as soon as people started to realize there are some factors that seem to increase people's risk, and there's other factors that you can work on in treatment to lower their risk. And so there's lots of things that we can do that actually work in the treatment of people who've been in trouble with the law. In terms of sexual offenders, the earliest studies going back to around 1989 actually didn't find very much in the way of treatment effects from our programs. The science wasn't that great, the treatment wasn't that great. Over time, and by the time 2002 rolled around, the first meta-analysis, sort of study of all the available studies, found that in fact treatment did work, and that the best kinds of treatment were what they refer to as cognitive behavioral treatment. And that if you can keep people in the community, especially juveniles, if you can keep young people in the community, that kind of treatment works a little bit better. Now there's been different kinds of studies looking at prison versus community programs for adults with kind of mixed results. But the bottom line is, when people complete treatment programs, on average they tend to do better. Okay. This is where a bunch of really decent scientists came in and said, well, wait a minute. Maybe it's not the treatment programs, maybe it's just that the people that complete these programs weren't the people that were going to go on to do it again anyway. And that these studies are actually kind of contaminated at a statistical level, but also they're contaminated by the fact that they're not taking into account people who drop out of treatment, people who get kicked out of treatment, and all of that sort of thing. And so there was a study done in 2005 that turned out to be the best statistically conducted study ever done, and it found a couple of things. When they just looked at people that went through the treatment program, those people didn't do any better than the ones who hadn't been through the treatment program. Uh-oh. But then the same authors in the same study said, but we did find that the people who actually got it, that was their language, the people that got it and really did complete their treatment goals in a meaningful fashion, those fellows really did reoffend at lower rates. So what do? How do we understand all of this? That study, by the way, came out in 2005, quite recently. The way that I've come to understand this is we need to make our treatment programs meaningful. It's a little bit like if your teacher comes into your class and simply says, take out a piece of paper and a pencil and complete the following exercises. It's not the same thing as if you say, this is really interesting. I really want to get better at this. You know, if I really put my mind to it, I could be a math teacher, a science teacher, or something like this. When clients in treatment have something that they can actually work towards, this kind of stuff means something. It's important. So the way that I've come to respond to this is, you know, it's really unconscionable if we then go and stop doing treatment just because we're not sure that it's the treatment that's working. At the end of the day, our task is to build up the guidance. We need to get our clients to a place where they can meaningfully complete the treatment goals that they have in front of them. Treatment is not about going in and completing a series of exercises. It's about an actual therapeutic relationship, really looking at goals that are meaningful to the client and figuring out ways that they can move forward. My friend Sue out in Minnesota, this is the place where she will always remind me, we also need to make sure that our communities, however, are supportive of the re-entry out of our prisons of these people. You can do everything that you want in treatment, but if you go back to a community that's going to treat you in a hostile fashion and not allow you to live any place, then you know what? We're actually going to increase that person's risk back up again. So at the end of the day, well, we know punishment doesn't work. Treatment can work. And having people in the community to whom a sexual offender can be accountable is absolutely going to work the best. So that's a very brief overview about what's happened with the treatment research. Again, thanks for listening.